Why is it that only the cardinals, the guys in red, get to pick a pope? And some people say that this is an election, even a democratic vote. But if only about 110 or 20 men pick the pope, how can that possibly be called an election? Especially when we're electing to the world's longest serving monarchy. Those words don't seem to go together. When did the white smoke come? Everyone knows that the cardinals have elected. Everybody's looking at a pipe and white smoke comes out. When did that begin? And where does that come from? And if this is an election, you'd think they'd pick the best person. So how did we get those shady Renaissance Medicis and Borgias? So what I want to do here is I want to explore the how and the what, and especially the why and the when of this thing that's called a papal conclave. And I'm drawing here not only on experience as a church historian, but I've done some media work when popes have passed away, or in the case of Benedict XIII, resigned in 2013, and the time came to elect a new pope. So we're going to go in a couple of chunks. We're going to begin with the earliest period, starting with Peter, and talking about how in that early period, when Christianity wasn't even legal in the Roman Empire, how did they pick the next person? Not even quite called the Pope yet. And then when Christianity becomes not only legal, but the only game in town, let's say roughly 350 to about the year 1000 or 1100, how do popes get elected during that period of time when the church is really very decentralized? And then around 1100, the church is going to really become a monarchy because the church is trying to compete with other monarchies in France and in England and in parts of Spain and Germany. And the Pope takes an if you can't beat them, join them approach. How does the move from decentralization to centralization occur? And it's at that point that we need to pause and spend a good amount of time on the cardinals. Where did they come from? And how did they get the exclusive right to be the electors? They're the ones who, with the Pope, put in this independent process, put in a process where the cardinals are locked in a room, in Latin conclave, with a key, which becomes the English and Italian word conclave. That's what that word means. And yet the conclave has only existed since the 13th century, the 1200s. So the church has been around for 2,000 years, but the conclave, which is the first thing you think of when you think of picking popes, is less than half as long as the church has been alive, has been around. And so it's in that period of time, that high medieval period, where they choose the cardinals. The cardinals are the only electors. They say it doesn't have to be unanimous. A 2/3 vote will do, and they're locked in a sealed room until everyone agrees. And all of this is supposed to be cloaked in secrecy. So how come we know so much about what went on behind these closed doors? And the rules that we're going to see from the Middle Ages and a little bit later than the Middle Ages are pretty much going to stand for about 400 years until Pope John Paul II and then Benedict XVI come along in the late 20th and early 21st centuries and make some significant changes. And while we're at it, we've been waiting and waiting for a pope to die to get a new pope, and then Benedict XVI resigns in 2013. How did that change the process? So hang on, we're going to start with about 2,000 years of history. And let's begin with some preconceptions, because I think it helps by asking, what do we think we know? And then moving to what we do know. And if you're looking for some sources to continue this conversation, if there's one book that you're going to read about papal elections, you see on your screen Frederick Baumgartner's book, Behind Closed Doors, A History of the Papal Elections. And what Fred Baumgartner did was he went into the Vatican archives and discovered that secrecy wasn't really so secret until about 200 years ago. And he literally found batches of ballots and accounts of the elections. And so he really finds some juicy material. Not very humble of me, but if you're interested in a quick look at the popes and the papacy, my own book is there, in which there is a section on the College of Cardinals and also a section on what we'll call papal succession. This betting and this secrecy, by the way, is something that we can have a lot of fun with. And in 2013, when Pope Benedict XVI resigned, the first pope to resign in 600 years, it happened to be around the time of the American College Basketball March Madness NCAA tournament. And you may know that in that tournament, they play until they get down to the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, and then finally the last four and the last two. And Religion News Service decided to come up with something clever that they called the Sweet Sistine, because it is in the Sistine Chapel that the cardinals are locked up with a key conclave in order to elect. So what they did was they had a little bit of fun with this, and they put out a chart of betting that you could do from the various regions of the planet. And we laugh at this, but in fact, you can bet online for how long the conclave will last, who the Pope will be, what papal name he will take. So let's start with an instructive myth. The myth of Pope Joan, a legend that is we should look at in its own right sometime for 50 minutes or an hour, but it's instructive for our story as how a pope is elected and why it's restricted to men. I should say, by the way, that the pope need only be, according to canon law, that's CANON, canon law or church law, the pope need only be a baptized male. It could be me, which would surprise my wife. The person need not even be Catholic, because after all, Protestants, such as Lutherans and Methodists, are baptized. The person can be married because it says baptized male, and the person need not even be ordained a priest, although if he is chosen, he must be ordained priest and then bishop, and it is at the moment that he is ordained or consecrated a bishop that he becomes pope, because strictly speaking, the pope is the Bishop of Rome. Part of that story, this restriction to male, brings us to the legend of Pope Joan. Now, I should say Pope Joan is in fact a legend. I'm not saying that because I'm male. I'm saying that because the person who revealed that this was a myth was in fact a 16th century French Protestant, a Huguenot. He looked at all of the material and realized that this was a hoax. There's no place in the record to place Joan. The dates that are used simply don't work. For the people who say, well, of course not, the church burned the records, now you're into conspiracy theorists, and that's not what historians talk about. But the legend is that there was a young woman who realized she would hit a glass ceiling, and she didn't have many opportunities to in the church. So she disguises herself as a man. She passes as a man. She binds her breasts. She enters a monastery and is so bright that she rises up through the ranks, taking the name Johannes, Joan Johannes, sometimes from England, Johannes Anglicanus, and finally is so bright and so brilliant that he is elected Pope. And this fact that she's a woman is discovered when one day, as she is traveling from one place in Rome to another place in Rome, she gives birth, represented here in these two scenes. And so therefore, it's awful the way the legend continues, because it says that the crowd is so enraged that they kill not only Joan, but the baby as well.